Hey guys, it's been my first few weeks with my very first pet jumping spider, and I have the top 5 tips and tricks that I'd like to share with you guys, as well as some mistakes that I've made along the way. I also have an awesome bonus tip you guys will want to stick around for that makes owning a jumping spider just that much more fun. So tip number 1 is huge and really important and really threw me for a loop. I had no idea if I was doing something wrong or if I was just like a really bad first-time spider owner, but turns out hiding doesn't necessarily mean they hate you. If you haven't seen your spider in a couple of days, but you do see a really thick, cozy web, there's a really good chance your spider's actually getting ready to molt, which I was really surprised by because that happened, honestly, almost as soon as I brought her home and got her into her new enclosure. She got comfortable, she spun up a little web, and the next thing I knew, I did not see Bonnie, but keeping a close eye on her, having really thorough conversations with ChatGPT about what may or may not be normal, I slowly and surely noticed eventually that there was another little Bonnie in her little hammock, a crispy, hollow Bonnie, have you. She had shed her exoskeleton and decided she was done with the old her. And when she was ready to come out, she made that point. She dragged the old her out and kind of threw it out into the rest of her enclosure, which was really kind of entertaining, but just a relief because I was so happy to see her and that she was okay. And that was really interesting and exciting because the way she looked changed so dramatically. She went from, I mean, she's still pretty tiny, but a little brown spiderling to suddenly being this like kind of colorful orange and black spider was really exciting and just really cool to see how dramatic the change can be from one molt to the next. So if you haven't seen your spider in a couple of days, but you are seeing that really thick hammock, that web that she's made herself really comfortable, there's a really solid chance that she's not just hiding, she's getting ready to molt. On the topic of molting, I learned that spiders at these younger instar ages actually molt pretty frequently. I was really worried about having a spider as a whole, so I wanted to make sure I could get the teeniest, tiniest spider I could. So I got Bonnie when she was about an instar 5 or 6. And instar, I'm learning, is a word that kind of is like the years of the spider, because they don't necessarily live multiple years, but as you'd consider yourself like a 5th grader moving into 6th grade, that's kind of the experience that she's having. She's shedding little bitty 5th grade Bonnie and moving into 6th grade Bonnie. And then eventually she'll move to instar 7, 8, 9, and then 10, I believe, 10 is that final molt. And that's when you really have an adult spider that doesn't have any more molting periods. So when I got Bonnie, I wanted to make sure I had a spider that was really young, so she'd be really small, but also so that I would have her as long as possible. Whereas if you purchase, say, like an adult spider that's already past their last molt, you may only have something like 6 months with that spider. I do recommend getting them a little bit younger, but just be patient, be ready for molting, for growing, and everything that experience entails. I do a pretty good job of providing for her, keeping her well fed, keeping her quite comfortable. So she has been healthy and happy and has been molting fairly regularly. So I'm expecting to see maybe another molt in the next like 3.5 weeks, but we will wait and see exactly when that's going to be as she now moves from, I believe, instar 8 to instar 9. Tip number 3 is a little bit gross, or maybe just like a little bit more than I actually bargained for. It turns out the best way to keep your feeder insects is to actually keep them and care for them. So I have my 1 bottle of blue bottle flies with their pumpkin banana food in the bottom. And I also have this 1 tiny little jar of mealworms. But for the mealworms, I haven't actually put any food in there, and I actually never transferred them out of their little tiny jar. And what I noticed as a result of that is that they eat each other. So now I have a jar of feeders that is about halfway populated with corpses, which is a little gross. So I am looking into kind of the next stage of keeping my feeders and maybe actually really keeping them and putting them in a bigger container that also has maybe some carrots and potatoes and stuff in there so that the worms eat food and get bigger instead of eating each other and me just having like a couple really big worms that ate the little worms. Tip number 4 is really the biggest mistake that I've made thus far. I had done some reading online that had mentioned that maybe, you know, a reptile heating pad is like not a good idea for a jumping spider enclosure. However, I got tired of having my big heater over here in the corner, so I decided to give it a try. So I did buy a reptile heating pad and put that underneath my bioactive terrarium. I then spent the evening away. I believe I went out to dinner. I can't recall exactly what I did. But when I came back, the humidity in my enclosure was something to the tune of 95%, which was immediately alarming. I noticed that the bottom portion of it had actually gotten quite warm where the sand and the rocks were, and that the soil was slowly just drying out. I also noticed that my isopods were climbing up my bark branch to try and get away from the hot soil that was probably kind of cooking them. So long story short, I am now out of isopods and springtails, but I've learned a very important lesson and will definitely not be putting any other reptile heating pads underneath my bioactive terrarium. If you're not using a bioactive terrarium, I would still say no, because I got lucky. Bonnie hangs out right at the top and the humidity wasn't necessarily like an immediate deal breaker. But if you just had a regular acrylic enclosure and the bottom of that acrylic enclosure was just cooking, you're probably gonna cook your spider. I'm really grateful I didn't cook my spider, really disappointed I cooked my isopods. Lesson learned, and it was a big one. Tip number 5 is really adding on to things that I've learned and things that I would do differently. I mentioned before I got Bonnie when she was really tiny because I wanted to have her as long as I could, and I also didn't want to be too scared of her. But I did make the mistake of getting a really, really big enclosure for a really tiny spider. So she is happy. She is happy as a clam in there, but she is happy as a clam that does not want to come out and doesn't seem to have a whole lot of interest in like actually interacting and engaging with me, which does kind of make sense since I put in so much effort to replicate her natural environment. Of course she wants to stay in there and properly be a spider, but I'm realizing I actually wanted more of a friend than just a little bug in a box, or at least I wanted a little spider friend, somebody who'd wanna, you know, jump on my finger and jump to the next finger and do that kind of thing. And I think she's a little too immersed in her little world to be super interested in that right now. But hopefully as she grows older, she'll have a little more curiosity and maybe be a little bit more brave and want to come outside and check out my space. Last tip, bonus tip, and really honestly, the most fun tip, the thing that really makes having your own spider like having your own little Animal Planet in a box on your desk. Bonnie really likes to hide in her little web, which is kind of like tucked away behind her bark and behind her little moss hide. So she doesn't always see food immediately as I put it in there. So my big tip, before I put the little worm in her feeder cup, I usually drop it on top of her acrylic enclosure so that she can kind of see it from underneath where she is. And then once I know I have her interest and she's like noticed the worm and she's actually seeing it and following it, that's when I will go ahead and like transition to dropping the worm into the little feeder cup, because then I have her attention and then I can sit there and just kind of focus on watching her stalk her prey and get ready to take it down. Sounds so gross, but I'm so into it. It's so cool. I love watching it. I really hope these tips help, and I really hope you enjoy watching fun new things and learning new things about your spider, and hopefully some of the tips that I've given you here today will help you avoid some of the mistakes that I have made. But as always, thanks for stopping in and thanks for checking us out.